Everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This morning I'm actually going to be discussing something that is a little bit more. I don't know if I like doing this kind of content, so I'd love to hear your guys' feedback, but it's a bit more, how would you say, kind of paparazzi style discussion right here. So I was actually reading through The Real Deal this morning, a publication that I check quite a lot just to kind of see what's going on in national real estate and in local LA real estate as well. And actually, they had an article here about the Altman Brothers, who are agents in LA. You probably could recognize them from Million Dollar Listing. Really nice guys from when I've met them and done business with them. But apparently, them and their seller have been sued over allegedly selling a moldy mansion to a buyer. Now, I was reading through this and it's quite interesting, more because of the fact that it kind of lets me talk about how the contracts work in LA and how removing of contingencies works. So apparently, this was the Envision Motors CEO, and he agreed to buy a Beverly Hills mansion for $22 million, which is a lot of money. And obviously, it's a serious amount of money to be losing or to be putting on the line should this mansion kind of not be what it is portrayed to be. So Simon Sarriedine, he has about 16 car dealerships. Apparently, he's suing the brokers and the former owner who sold him an estate in Beverly Park. Now, when it says sold him an estate, I believe that this deal has not closed. So therefore, when they say sold him an estate, I believe that's not correct. I'm going to put a link to this article down in the description below so you guys can kind of read through it yourself. But at $22 million, and it was in Beverly Park. So Beverly Park is an amazing part of Beverly Hills. It's kind of at the top end, and it is a kind of gated community. There are only a certain amount, very few houses there, and all of them are big estates. I've seen properties in there before if you follow Mansion Tours on my Instagram, or on, I think there may be a couple uploaded onto the YouTube channel here as shorts. I believe the kind of Game of Thrones house that we kind of saw, Harry Potter style one, that is also in Beverly Park. Now, apparently, the former owners were Hollywood agent and his wife. I don't think I want to disclose their names because that is mentioned later. But the buyer, Saradin, apparently agreed to a deal on April 4th, 2023. And this was to buy a property on Summit Ridge, as I've said. He received the transfer disclosure statement the next day. And so, what a transfer disclosure statement is when the seller is selling a property, they effectively need to disclose anything they are aware of in the property. Now, if that's an issue, such as the foundations are failing or anything like that, they need to be telling the buyer that legally, and they need to disclose that. So, in an issue that could arise later, could be that if there is proof that that seller has done investigations, has had inspections done, has been aware of an issue, and then has not disclosed it to a potential buyer, that could be a legal issue in itself. However, there is also a situation where maybe a seller is aware of something, however, they don't necessarily disclose it because who can prove that they're aware of it? So it can be a bit of a gray area there. So obviously, this lawsuit probably plays into that a bit. And apparently, neither the seller nor the buyer's agents, or the seller's agents, I presume, disclosed the mold or other material issues. Now, apparently, in this transaction, I believe Josh Altman represented the seller, and Matthew Altman, his brother, represented the buyer. So they would have probably been co-listing agents, or their team would have listed the property. And what often happens is there can be a conflict of interest if the same agent represents both buyer and seller, because to represent both best interests is very difficult. Now, what happens a lot is this is the case and the buyer's gone directly to the agents who are listing the property. They'll normally either split up so that one agent takes the buyer's side, one agent takes the seller's side. So in this situation, that seems like what has happened. So it said that in the disclosure statements, none of them were aware of the mold in the property, and neither the seller nor the buyer's agents disclosed this in the transfer disclosure statement. So apparently the buyer, Saradin, put down $2.1 million in a deposit. So that is kind of like your good faith deposit. You put it into escrow at the start of the escrow period, give it to the escrow company at the start of the escrow period. And that is almost like your kind of it's the seller's security, so that if you start wasting their time, you start messing around, and they've said, look, I'm going to buy this property, I've released my disclosures, I'm happy that the property is there that I'm going to close on. You basically have that as kind of a backup, as not a backup, as an insurance policy where you're going to get that sum of money should that situation arise. Obviously, that is kind of a good faith, and it's normally very standard in nearly all real estate transactions in LA. And so that obviously took place. And so at that point, the buyers has the option to perform inspections. Now, that is normally laid out in the offer, saying, look, we want this much time to do inspections, we want this length of escrow. There are certain parameters that are laid out at the point of offer before the seller accepts it and the buyer is happy and countersigns it. Now, it seems like in this one, he's put 2.1 million down as a deposit, and he did conduct an inspection. Sometimes, if it's a rundown property or if you're just buying land, you don't really need an inspection. And some buyers, in certain situations, multi-buy, multi-bid situations where they're competing against buyers, that may make their offer look more attractive. So they may say, look, I don't need an inspection, but it is very standard to do it. So it looks like he had an inspection. However, it was only for 5 days, a contingency for 5 days, which means after the acceptance of that offer, he has 5 days to do all of the inspections and the investigations into the property that he would like before he releases the inspection contingency. He says, hey, look, I'm happy to buy this. I've done my investigations and I'm happy. Now, normally that's about 14 days. If your typical escrow period in Los Angeles is 30 days. So, from making the offer to getting the keys is a 30-day period, 1 month. You normally have 14 days to do those inspections. Sometimes it's 11, but sometimes, obviously, in certain situations, the seller wants to sell quickly, needs to get that offer done and the deal done faster. The buyer similarly needs to do that. Then that inspection period can get cut down. So it seems like in this situation, it was cut down. And after he conducted the inspection, he alleges that the 11,000 square foot mansion was plagued by mold and in a state of disrepair. So he says that the 5 day inspection was not long enough, not enough time for him to do the due diligence, and obstacles blocked him actually doing the inspections. He says at the time of the visual inspection of the property, areas of the property, including the wine cellar, were locked and could not be accessed by the buyer or the buyer's agent. So the inspector that probably worked for the buyer and the buyer's agent wasn't able effectively to see these areas, which you should be providing access to everywhere in the property during that inspection period. Apparently, he was given little time to do the investigations and he was forced to accept the seller's representations of the property. So it sounds like he was saying, look, I've done my investigations, nothing seeming awful. And obviously, he wasn't aware of this mold at the time. So he released his contingencies. So basically, that means, look, I'm happy for this offer to go through. I'm going to say, look, I'm happy with the condition based on my investigations. So this is quite an interesting part, I think, of this lawsuit. And apparently on May 31st, he commissioned the inspection of the property with the seller's knowledge. The inspection identified numerous safety concerns and recommended corrections that were not identified in the seller's reports, which is normal, but not limited to loose electrical wiring, uncovered junction boxes, and water intrusions in multiple doors and windows. Mold and fungus investigation identified that was throughout the house, including but not limited to an active leak coming from the primary bathroom. This apparently was built in 2002. I would say when you do inspections, a huge amount of these issues, the inspector's job is to bring up everything. So a lot of these issues do come up and a lot of them are fairly easy to resolve, even though they sound pretty awful. Uncovered junction boxes, you put a cover on it. Mold obviously is a bit more difficult to get rid of, but you can have treatments on that mold. Weirdly, in the UK and in the London market, mold, because it's a very wet climate and old buildings, is kind of a given. Most properties you will find mold in. LA, it is completely the opposite. When anyone finds mold, it's a massive red flag. So I find that quite interesting. Obviously, mold is dangerous, but it's definitely a different take in both areas. So apparently on October 31st, his attorneys filed the suit in the LA Superior Court against Josh Altman. So that is the seller's agent who served as the listing agent, Matt Altman, who served as his agent, the buyer's agent, and Douglas Elliman. So It's going to be basically a lawsuit against Douglas Elliman and their agents, which does happen occasionally. You know, agents are working between fine lines and they need to be trying to do everything as right as they can. But in 30 days, there's obviously things which some people perceive as wrong, some people perceive as right. And there's these things do pop up, and brokers, you know, the actual broker company, nearly all, well, all of them have legal counsel. So in my office, if we had something which was a, you know, is this what the right way to do it? You know, a seller comes back and says, you know, I'm not happy with this. You could consult that legal counsel, and if anything arose, then they would be taking care of it. Part of being a broker and not being your own broker, obviously, you're not covering that cost. Um, so apparently, uh, the seller is effectively being said that, you know, you didn't represent the property, and it was effectively, you know, misleading what you gave to the buyer, and he's put his $2 million into escrow and released the contingencies based on that because he did not have enough time to do the investigation. Um, so it states that Sarriedine has suffered harm estimated to excess of $2 million, which sounds like that's his deposit, but the amount would be established at a trial. He also requested a cancellation of the contract to buy Summeridge. So it sounds actually like he did not close escrow, i.e., pay that full $22 million. But the seller is saying, look, because you released contingencies and you said, look, I'm happy to buy this house, that deposit is legally mine. And so he is, or they are effectively taking that deposit or saying that this is mine. And then the seller is turning around, sorry, the buyer is turning around and saying, hey, no, this is wrong. Yes, I released my contingencies. However, I was not given enough time and I went on your disclosures, which were not uh, rightly done. You know, you did not disclose everything you were aware of. So they sent the buyer a demand to close on escrow before October 31st. And so normally, if you have outlined in the offer, this is the escrow period, and the buyer has released their contingencies, they need to close by a certain date. And so he is sued to say, I'm not going to be paying for this property. Um, so it's a big property, 7.5 acres. It's got an infinity pool, a spa, cold plunge. A lot of these houses, you know, at this price point will have those kinds of things. Apparently, Josh Altman has declined to comment. I know Josh, and so I do not want to say anything negative about him. My experience has always been very positive. And so what I found when I read this, obviously, is it's a very long article. Apologies if that was kind of a very long-winded of going through this, but it is an issue where the contract in real estate in Los Angeles and in California is set out to effectively avoid this situation. So normally, as I've said, the contract when you make the offer will stipulate this is the amount I'm offering, this is the terms that I'm offering this amount under, this is whether I'm getting a mortgage or I'm paying cash, this is what I'm going to put down in terms of a deposit into escrow. Should there be issues, then the seller has that as kind of like an insurance. And this is the term or the length of escrow in which we're going to not just do inspections, but the date we're going to finish and close and hand over the keys. So it seems like in this situation, I don't know why it was a 5-day inspection period, because normally, as I said, it's 14 days or around that time. And usually for a big house like this, you may want even more time because obviously you're going to have to do more investigations than you usually would. So what it sounds like to me is the buyer has turned around and said, look, we'll do an escrow from April to October, to the end of October. So that's a long escrow. However, he said, look, I only want 5 days, or there's been pressure on him to say, I only want 5 days investigation period. So after the end of that 5 days, he has turned around and signed a removal of contingencies saying, right, I'm happy to buy this property based on the condition of it. So 5 days for me is a very fast time to do that. Then what's happened is that he has said, after kind of, you know, maybe doing more inspections or whatever has occurred there, this is not what I expected. This is not what was written in the seller's disclosures. This was not written when the buyer's agent and the seller's agent went through the property, had a look, and wrote their disclosures. And so therefore, I am not happy that I'm going to buy this property and I'm not going to buy it. by the 31st of October. So in this situation, obviously he's released the contingency. So that deposit, the $2 million he's put into escrow, legally the seller can turn around and say, hold on, I want to take that. That's my money because you said you were going to buy it. I've, gone into escrow with you for this many months, and therefore I'm going to take that deposit, even if you don't want to buy the property, pay the full 22 million. And obviously the buyer has turned around and said, no, this is wrong because you haven't disclosed this. Therefore, I'm not going to give you this $2 million, or I'm going to basically sue you in a trial to say that I want that money back. What I would say is the few situations that I've been in where that has happened, normally the seller will, normally, I don't want to say that, but the sellers in my situations have turned around and said, you know what, I'm going to give them the deposit back. It's not worth going through this hassle of a fight, but obviously they do have a legal right to do that. So this is going to be a very interesting case from how I'm reading it, just from this article. And so don't take what I'm saying as to being, really delving into this. It's just from kind of the, paparazzi, this is a headline thing that I'm reading. It does seem more like, if I'm reading this correctly, the seller has the correct situation. Now, obviously, he's also suing the agents. And if he can prove that, the Altman brothers somehow got this, got the seller to release contingencies early based on something that they were telling him, then there may be something there. But from what I'm reading, the seller, if he's had a release of contingencies based on the inspection, he has the right now to take that deposit that's in escrow. So if this progresses further, sometimes it will get settled out of court, but if this progresses further, I'll try and keep you guys updated. Hopefully this was a bit of different tact, and obviously it allowed me to kind of talk about some of the ways that we do business in LA. But I thought that would be interesting, and I hope you guys appreciate it. As I said, I'll put a link to this article down below in the description. And please let me know if you like this type of content, if you think I'm completely wrong, if you think I messed up on something. I really want to know it, because obviously I'll go back and I'll correct what I've said. But as far as I understand it, that is the situation. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for giving me your time. I'm going to be back tomorrow with another update, so I'll speak to you very soon. Goodbye.